welcome everyone. Thank you for coming out today, this Saturday, the 25th of June, 2016. This is a meeting being held in League City, next door, virtually next door to the Johnson Space Center. And the theme of this is really opening up the age of reason. Moving from closed world to an open world. We'll be hearing from Keisha Rogers with the LaRouche Political Action Committee, former Democratic not only candidate but nominee for Congress in the 22nd District twice and candidate for U.S. Senate, and Megan Beats from the LaRouche Science Team. Those will be our speakers this afternoon. Then there'll be a short break for conversation and refreshments, and then a number of contributions in terms of music, choral works, instrumental, soloists from the classical domain of great music. So we hope you'll stick around for that as well. June of 1985, the Scheller Institute sponsored a concert along with the Fusion Energy Foundation, not a concert and all that too, but a conference in memory of Krafft Ehricke, who just passed away. And the proceedings were published at the time, Colonized Space, Open the Age of Reason. And it was attended by a bevy of scientists, flag officers, citizens, not only from across the United States, but Europe, Japan, and other nations as well. One of the contributors to that event was Herman Oberth, the great founding rocket scientist, one of the three really fathers of rocketry and rocket science. And I'm just going to read a few just very short parts of his greetings to the conference. He starts out, "I have a great interest in the conceptions of my very dear and esteemed colleague Krafft Ehricke for the exploitation and settlement of the moon and space by men. I am of the opinion, as my colleague Krafft Ehricke, that space flight technologies can overcome all of the apparent limits of our present existence on Earth. Lack of energy, scarcity of resources, environmental pollution, scarcity of food, and provide for an expansion of human population. This would presuppose, of course, that the willingness to conduct war in our democratic era immediately ceases, and it becomes possible to create the conditions of justice, which alone are guarantees of peace. To stop the willingness to conduct war, knowledge and the corrections of psychological and sociological aberrations are necessary." And I really think that frames today, 31 years later, almost to the day, those comments. We're at a moment where we really are in a situation of two systems being before the world, as Helga Zepp-LaRouche put it. And they really do correspond to what Krafft Ehricke, the great German-American rocket scientist, counterposed as the closed and open worlds. And we'll be speaking much more about that today. My purpose here now is to quickly summarize the world as it is at the moment, and therefore set the stage, shall we say. Right now in Berlin, Germany, an international conference is occurring, being held by the Scheller Institute, with important representation from nations around the world, from all the continents of the world. And we'll be publishing and videotapes and so forth will be available on our website of those proceedings. It was keynoted by Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and she started by saying, it really echoes Oberth as well as Krafft Ehricke. Mankind faces a grand future if we survive the fate of the dinosaurs. Now, that's said in all seriousness. Americans are very unaware of this as it proceeds right under our collective nose. But a confrontation is being built up, has been being built up by the current administration, the Obama administration, and its allies, as in London, against both Russia and China as nations. Operation Anaconda 2016 just concluded just a couple of days ago. 30,000 troops on the border of Russia in Poland. That was only part of a collection of 4 or even 5 large-scale maneuvers occurring from the Baltic all the way down through Romania. The total number of troops, an estimate is somewhere between 50 and 60,000 NATO troops were involved in those large-scale maneuvers. And we've seen similarly an escalation of continued military operations into the South China Sea. And the warnings that have been made by China are fitting to the circumstances, but also underscore the fact that we really are, as former Defense Secretary William Perry said, in the worst showdown situation, thermonuclear potential showdown, since the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's how serious it is. And the very fact that this is not being widely debated and discussed, deliberated upon, in the middle of a presidential election year, is perhaps scarier than the situation itself. Now, I'll just quickly counterpose the open world alternative, which very much has to do with this strategic crisis. First, let me just mention something that you probably are aware of, that Britain has left the European Union, at least in terms of the vote cast by Her Majesty's British subjects. That was not so much that is not something that is being reacted to. What we're now witnessing, what we saw on Friday, for example, in terms of the markets and the currency valuations and so on and so forth, the tumult in the market, as it was called, which is expected to continue, is not a reaction to the vote, the Brexit vote, in Britain. Rather, the Brexit vote itself, the entire process, has been on Russia. The economic breakdown of the transatlantic region, which is exemplified by the closing down of the U.S. manned space mission, just as a very important, pertinent example. That breakdown of productivity, the flatlining of investment into industry, the shrinking manufacturing base of the United States, declines in manufacturing employment month after month for now somewhere over 14 months in a row, and so forth, all are real indicators of this process of economic crisis. And so what otherwise fed into the Brexit vote? Well, look to the wars in the Middle East, starting with the Iraq invasion under the Bush administration. And these endless wars have created, among other things, a tremendous refugee crisis. We have now over 65 million human beings who are refugees, on the highest number, certainly since World War II, that have existed. And of course, large numbers of those refugees are from war, as well as economic displacement otherwise. And many of them, as you know, are attempting desperately. They have a 50-50 chance of crossing the Mediterranean alive to get to Europe. Now, that refugee crisis in Europe has fed the reaction, the closed world reaction that we see reflected in the Brexit vote. So this is an outcome not of the Brexit vote. It's an outcome of the Obama administration policies and the nations, the leadership or lack of leadership in Europe, which has fueled this process and continued to support it, including supporting these wars. And so in that sense, you could say we are reaping what we sowed. Now there's a reaction to that. There's a response to that, I should say, a reasoned response. Let me just say directly in terms of the war, not only is former Defense Secretary William Perry among those speaking out, but a cross-section of thoughtful leaders in Europe, I think led most provocatively by Defense Minister, or Foreign Minister, Steinmeier of Germany, came out in the last week blasting these maneuvers that I was just mentioning, Anaconda and so forth, as irrational, and stated that tank parades along the Russian border were going to do nothing to ensure security for either Europe or Russia. And that was followed then by a blistering back and forth. This is occurring in Europe. Obviously, if you've heard anything about this, you're lucky, because this is not something being reported in the American press. Again, this is really an extraordinary circumstance in that regard. He was backed in turn by others, including the head of the Social Democratic Party in Germany and others. Now, so there is now a debate that's erupting in Europe on strategic policy, on the direction, where are we going, which is far more important than the Brexit vote itself. Far, far, far more important than the Brexit vote, one way or the other. Now, there's also been the other side of this, the open world side of this, in broader terms, and what really frames Steinmeier's intervention as foreign minister of Germany, is the process of the New Silk Road and Eurasian Land Bridge, the One Belt, One Road policy of Xi Jinping and the Chinese government, the People's Republic of China, and the corresponding policies of Putin, Vladimir Putin, and the Russian government, which began with or among other major aspects of it, was the intervention into Syria directly to take on ISIS, to prove that they could be beaten, which changed a lot in the international dynamic. But now what we have had, just in the last week and a half, is a series of extraordinary conferences. The St. Petersburg conference was just held the 16th through the 18th. Over 12,000 people gathered in St. Petersburg, Russia. This is the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Remember, Russia is supposed to be isolated. And 12,000, not just people, but 12,000 government, 12,000 representatives of governments, corporations, and others were there, the press, to take part in this multi-day conference, which signed over $12 to $14 billion in business-to-business deals, as well as all sorts of panel discussions, panel conferences on economic development, cooperation in economic development. The Russia-Japan conference, or panel of the conference, had 6 business executives from Japan participating. Again, Russia's supposed to be isolated. India, 4 top business executives took part on the panel on Russia-India economic development. I should mention that Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, will be going in September to Vladivostok to attend the international conference there on the development of the Far East, which many other countries from throughout the region are participating in. But this is a shift since Sochi, since Abe met with Prime Minister Putin in Sochi, Russia, back a month ago. This is just a taste of what has gone on there. Then there was the conference in Uzbekistan, in Tashkent, just the last couple of days, concluding yesterday, of what's called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is probably off the radar screen of most people here, maybe less so here in this room, but in terms of the American people as a whole. But the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is Russia, it's the Stan countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and China, has now welcomed in 2 new members, which are India and Pakistan, nominally longtime enemies, but now have been brought into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, into this cooperative framework for economic development, to combat terrorism. You can imagine their concern over Afghanistan and also over ISIS. So this is a high-level collaboration, which was underscored in the remarks by Prime Minister Modi, for example, there from India at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. So these are just a few of the most recent developments. But over $1 trillion has now been committed in terms of large-scale infrastructure projects along what is called the Silk Road, the belt over land, the old Silk Road, and the maritime Silk Road. Huge port development projects. Chabahar in southeast Iran. Joint development project now signed, sealed, and delivered between India, Afghanistan, and Iran. That's just an example. Gwadar port at the southwest of Pakistan will be a similar port. These are, in the case of Chabahar, a $20 billion port development project, a massive project. Gwadar will be similar. It's the end of the line, shall we say, to the ocean, to the port of the China-Pakistan Economic Development Corridor, which is another, I believe it's 40, maybe my figure's off, but $40 billion project which is underway, which is rail as well as highway, as well as other forms of connectivity, energy, communications, and so on and so forth. I'm just giving you a few examples of what's going on the other side of the world. While we have the highest suicide rates among youth ever in the history of this country, and we have record suicide rates among Americans of all ages, and we have 93 million plus Americans who are not employed but are potentially employed, are no longer looking for work. So they're no longer considered unemployed, they simply dropped out of the labor force. This is not college kids, that's not part of those numbers, but they're extraordinary figures in terms of what's going on. So the open world of Krafft Ehricke beckons, and the basis for international cooperation of reason, as among others Herman Oberth was speaking of, is there. It's not an abstraction, it's nuts and bolts, but even more importantly, it's ideas. And so I'd like to conclude my introduction with that and welcome Keisha to the podium. Keisha Rogers.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian. That was a tremendous introduction and an optimistic one as well. Well, I would just like to say that as the recent events indicate, and as Brian has very beautifully laid out from the standpoint find ourselves and where humanity lies right now, that the conferences taking place simultaneously around the world, that has really given us a perspective once again for a new vision for mankind. You know, that conference just described by being put forth by the Schiller Institute at this very moment that we're speaking, exemplifies the idea that we are on the verge of bringing forth an age of reason, defined by peace and cooperation, and defined by development. It shows that we are truly on the verge of a new paradigm and a renaissance for mankind. This new system and new paradigm can only be brought about through the emergence of a new system of economic development, not based on monetary value, but based on the creative identity and unlimited potential for mankind that is now becoming the dominant principle among leading nations around the world. And this system of economic value, which has been described by what the president of Russia, President Putin, the president of China, President Xi Jinping, and Prime Minister Modi of India, and many others, to name a few, recognize as the system of economic value which puts no limitations on human progress and human creative potential. And this is the system that is emerging throughout the world, that is now representing over 50% of the world's population. It is a system of economic value which once shaped our great republic, but a system in which we have long forgotten. And it reminds me of what the great economist, American statesman economist, Henry Carey, spoke about this very idea of two systems before the world. One that would promote barbarism, pauperism, war, starvation, and one that would promote the increase in human identity and human progress. And we see now that that system that has been dominating our society, and that paradigm of barbarism and zero growth policy and of a dying empire, is now coming to its end. And a new system is emerging. That what we have heard in terms of the system which is now put mankind on the brink of its annihilation, if we don't choose to act on the true purpose and intention of mankind, that we can once and for all put this dying financial system and British Empire to an end and bring about a world of cooperation, peaceful progress, and scientific and technological development. Now, when you think about a great example of the emergence of a system that rejected a zero growth society and understood the conception of mankind's unlimited potential and progress, one of the greatest examples of that lies in the Apollo program and the vision laid out by President John F. Kennedy, which was one of the greatest examples of the continuation of what was the embodiment of mankind reaching an age of reason and coming to fulfill what the Renaissance had brought about. Now, Kennedy gave a speech that many people remember and think about on occasion in May of 1961, May 25th, 1961. But I want to say this is not a speech to think about when Kennedy said announced that we would send a manned land a man on the moon and return them safely to Earth. It wasn't something to hearken on the good old days. That was a time of past that is long gone, that cannot be thought of again. But you have to look at Kennedy's vision was embodied in the future. It wasn't something that was just to take place in the immediate period and to be long forgotten. And what Kennedy recognized is that this vision was not just for one nation, but was going to be for the benefit of all nations. And that's why it was such a threat to this zero growth system that sought to keep people impoverished, enslaved, and down. Because Kennedy knew that accomplishing this mission of landing a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth was not just for the benefit of the few, but it was going to mobilize the best in the nation in scientific industry, technology, and education. That the country would meet the challenge of doing that which it had never done before, of creating something entirely new, and that you would be transforming mankind to new leaps of human development and economic existence. Now, Brian spoke about the mind, the great mind and contributions of a dear friend of the LaRouche, Mr. and Mrs. LaRouche and the Schiller Institute, and should be a dear friend of yours and the world, but one who has been isolated and who has long been forgotten because of his optimistic view of the creative and unlimited potential of mankind, Krafft Ehricke. Now, without Krafft Ehricke's vision and that which inspired John F. Kennedy, that accomplishment and goal that we made, and many after that, would not have been possible. That Krafft Ehricke had the vision of an open world system, that mankind's extraterrestrial imperative was to transform cislunar space and other planetary bodies. But this only could come about with a rejection to a limitation of a zero growth system and a system that said that mankind is confined to a single planet of limited resources that we have to continue to fight over. Now, very inspiring speech that Krafft Ehricke gave was 5 years after the anniversary of the landing on the moon, the 5th anniversary of the lunar landing. And in this speech, Krafft Ehricke exemplified everything that he dedicated his life to, capturing the true essence of mankind's destiny in the open world of space. Space, as he understood, was mankind's extraterrestrial imperative. Now, when you think about that, that's not just a catchy slogan for all the space buffs and gurus and so forth, but it had a fundamental implication, extraterrestrial imperative, that was embodied and rooted in a philosophical and principled battle over the unlimited potential of mankind and human progress. And it was this battle that Krafft Ehricke waged at a very time when the space program, just as it is today, was under brutal attack. And during the time that Krafft Ehricke was putting forth his extraterrestrial imperative and the consequences of an open versus a closed world system, he realized that the dominant policy and the dominant paradigm which was taking place at that point in time was one of a system that posed limitations on mankind's progress. A system that thought of human beings as nothing more than the multiplication of mindless lilies in a pond. That is what Krafft Ehricke took on, and that system that he waged war against. When you look at the fact that at the very time that we launched the Apollo mission, there was a major battle going on to put a stop to it. There was the emergence of the no limits to growth environmentalist agenda. There was the emergence of the policies for financial warfare against the space program and what it represented. Now, it was Krafft Ehricke's belief in human progress and the unlimited potential which he was attacked for, just as his engagement with Mr. LaRouche and our political and international organization, because he promoted too much optimism. He had a different view of mankind, which he sought, which he understood would be the only conception of human beings that could bring about an age of reason. Now, Krafft Ehricke was a brilliant mind, but what he actually challenged in people was that you cannot put a limitation on your human identity. He believed that the open world concept of mankind had been expressed and had its rightful place in the Apollo mission. And at last, the achievement and the discovery of mankind that had not been accomplished till then was a new opening and breakthrough for what we were capable of accomplishing. And he said that the landing on the moon in July of 1969 carried with it the everlasting phase that we came in peace for all mankind. Krafft's description of the heritage of Apollo spoke not merely of a past event, but the future which had not yet been created, a future that could only be brought about by the rejection of such limitations to mankind's potential and progress. Now, Krafft Ehricke saw the space program as an expression of the true Renaissance. He was defining the unlimited potential of the human mind and the moral law within mankind and man himself that would enable him to open the age of reason. And I think he laid out the anthropology of astronautics in 1957, which really was the embodiment and shaping of the principle of what the space program really represents, but not just the space program, but the principle by which mankind should actually live, which states at first law that nobody and nothing under the natural laws of the universe impose limitations on man except man himself. Not only the earth, but the entire solar system, and is man's rightful field of activity. By expanding through the universe, man fulfills his destiny as an element of life, endowed with the power of reason and the wisdom of the moral law within himself. Now, that's a person who really lived in the future and who knew that mankind had a destiny not to be confined to one small planet. I find this, he really puts forth this destiny in the heritage of Apollo, where he takes your imagination and the understanding of what we have to do, what our destiny is in exploring and conquering and actually transforming our galaxy. And he says, and people just don't think this way anymore, quote, "Earth is not an isolated spaceship, but travels in the convoy of our star, luxurious passenger liner, floating through galactic space along a giant power station and many freighters. Let us not tear up the stateroom furniture to use it for resources. We can board the freighters." It was done on July 20th, 1969. The human dimension of Apollo's heritage is a message of hope and confidence, of growth and fulfillment, of human potential, in brief, of a greater and potentially better world, if we choose to make it so, end quote. Now, that optimistic view of mankind's destiny was not one shared and continues not to be one shared by those who continue to push a anti-science, limits to growth, neo-Malthusian view of man, that we are confined to one small planet fighting over limited resources. And it exists today. That is the fight that we're up against right now. And what you see is that the targeting of the space program has been rooted in this promotion of pessimism and cultural degeneracy. When we examine the criminal targeting of our space program, as was stated earlier, in the United States, under the atrocious cuts and attack by President Obama and the attacks to the manned space program, most people want to make this a matter of monetary value, or a question of, oh, there's not enough money, we have to take these cuts. But that is not the target. The target is a rejection of the true conception of what it means to be human, and to put people in a state of bestialization. And that's what the scientific community has to come to understand too, that this is a war over the minds and the souls of mankind and human progress, and which is absolutely necessary to lift the population of the United States and the world out of the slumps of despair. And as Brian said earlier, this is what you get when you have a society which has been the optimism, which actually gives people a sense that they can accomplish anything, is completely taken away from a society. And that's what has happened to our space program. It's not a matter of, did you agree with this policy? Was this policy any good or not any good? The question is, what is the real intention rooted in right now? And the intention is that the optimism that the space program brings about is a danger to this zero growth system. And Krafft Ehricke attacks this intent, which has been the basis of the targeting of our space program, by promoting that mankind has the capacity for unlimited growth. And he contrasts this conception of the multiplication of mankind like lilies in a pond to the increase in knowledge, in wisdom, in the capacity to grow in new ways. That's what you're seeing right now emerging in the Trans-Pacific, in the Asia-Pacific regions, in China, uplifting over 600 million people from poverty and more, uplifting the world. What are we doing here in the United States? What has happened to us? Now, the point is that you can't have a renaissance in a dead and degenerate culture. And you can't have a space program which promotes the true principle of human creativity in a zero growth society. And people who have waged war against the space program, opposing these true intentions, have made very destructive claims that the space program promotes false optimism, that it promotes the idea that good can come from scientific progress. And this is just not true, that there will be never good coming from scientific progress. Somebody is going to use it for the ill. And it only should be for the advancement of a very few. For all you guys who've read Bertrand Russell, he's an evil guy. Now, this is a false conception of human nature, and a false conception of a culture which truly fosters genius and creativity and a commitment to creating the future, which improves the conditions of human life on the planet and off the planet, and which brings about the existence of what Krafft Ehricke defined as mankind transcending the confines of one planet and going into what we can understand as a truly polyglobal world. This is a commitment, as said, that is being put forth by the commitment for peace and human progress and cooperation that's being fostered by those nations of Russia and China. And I want to just take 1 second here. Okay. So, as said, has been stated, Krafft Ehricke understood that there were consequences of mankind's actions. And this is a diagram schematic that he actually developed. This is only half of it, which is the growth paradigm, which he calls the open world system, which is the more optimistic and positive one. But it requires certain understanding of what it is that we have to reject in terms of what has been imposed on mankind's ability to create the type of expansion, technological developments, and a renaissance that truly rejects all limitations. And, you know, if you look at what he poses here, you know, this is what is the conception of mankind that we have to be fighting for. And this idea of growth is what we're seeing, which is becoming a dominant factor in a dominant paradigm in our culture right now. For those who can't read it, it just goes, it's an upward trajectory of growth, which is immersed in enlightened education and an open world of outgrowing development, technological science, international cooperation, and overcoming limitations, basic limitations, resource limitations, and so forth, of industrial development, the development of increases in productivity, and extraterrestrial industrialization, which we'll hear more about in a few moments, industrialization of the moon and other bodies, and the increase in the life expectancy of your planet. Now, what I was inspired by recently is the recent meeting. People have a chance to go on YouTube and watch this. Along with the many conferences that Brian brought up earlier, one of the conferences that just took place a few days ago was a conference in St. Petersburg, Russia, with Prime Minister Renzi of Italy, President Putin of Russia, and Nazarbayev of Uzbekistan. And all of them really exemplified this conception of a growth paradigm in an open world system. And I was extremely inspired by the Italian Prime Minister. And people should watch these things because Texans are too stuck in their backyard. You need to be world citizens, world leaders, and you will have a better conception of what it is that we can be accomplishing. And I mean, we once had that view when we had a space program that actually defined that. But going back to my point, all three of them spoke about the need for peaceful cooperation, collaboration, advances in technological and scientific improvements that would increase the productivity of mankind. And when it got to the Prime Minister of Italy, who spoke, he put his notes to the side and was completely transformed. This is the meeting with 12,000, 16,000. There's somewhere along there, people who were there that was supposed to be isolating, as Brian said, Russia. But people were extremely inspired, and said, you know, during his speech, he talked about the increasing of the life expectancy of human beings around the planet to 100 years old. I mean, we used to kind of have that. People know their grandparents. My great-grandfather lived till he was 103 years old. But, you know, he had a different work ethic and sense of life and why you have a mission to live. And, you know, back then the food was better and everything else. But, I mean, that's the very thing that Prime Minister Renzi was speaking about. How do you increase the life expectancy of the planet? Through the types of scientific breakthroughs that eliminates disease and poverty and war and brings about a peaceful and beautiful cooperation of mankind. And we can accomplish and bring this about. Now, this is what you're seeing very directly with the new commitment and cooperation around the space program, promoting peace among nations, which many agreements have been signed, including with Russia and China. Agreements of cooperation and exploration of space that we in the United States should be a part of. We in the United States should be working and collaborating with China as they're going to investigate and to do something that has never been accomplished by man before, by going to the far side of the moon and bringing the potential for mankind to new leaps. That what you're seeing with this cooperation is that the polyglobal world is truly being brought into existence, and the zero growth paradigm is not going to have any place in our system any longer. Now, I want to end once again with Krafft Ehricke's conception of which transforms all practical thinking and transforms all limitations put on mankind's creative progress, and which people, the conception and identity in which people should live by today. You know, a conception that went against just, I'm living for the moment and for myself and for my own personal gratifications. That Krafft Ehricke made the point that he said, we come to understand that once, quote, Earth and world are no longer synonymous. We no longer live in a closed world of one planet inside a womb of a biosphere. Our world is no more closed than it is flat. And that's very important for some people, because there's some people out there who are promoting the idea that we have a flat Earth, Flat Earth Society, they missed the boat. I don't know where they've been. But Krafft Ehricke says, quote, "Our world is open to space and its resources within are potentially limitless. It is the human mind which will unlock those unlimited resources of our universe." Now, what you see is, I want you to put up the Selenopolis. So Krafft Ehricke had quite an imagination, and he knew that the potential for human progress would transform and transcend mankind's wildest imagination. And so here is the capturing of a artistic depiction done by Krafft Ehricke, and I'm sorry the quality is so bad here. And this is a city on the moon, envisioned in a painting by Krafft Ehricke, which has a museum of astronauts, indoor rail system, probably high-speed rail system, all of this powered, nuclear powered. There was no windmills and solar. And you know that this is what Krafft Ehricke saw the moon as our seventh continent, but it was where mankind would transcend cislunar space and would actually, you know, there's no borders here. There's no war. There's no differences of hegemony. There's no hegemony and unipolar dominance, but nations, people living together in harmony. And we have to bring that forward once again. That is the embodiment of the age of reason. That is what is being created by the BRICS nations, by the development of the nations who are taking the leadership to bring this age of reason about within our world right now and beyond. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Megan to continue this composition. Thank you.
Thanks, Keisha. So, I'd actually like to begin with an idea that was expressed, or maybe better said, even an observation, a scientific conclusion that was come to by a great thinker of the late 19th and early 20th century, a Russian, Vladimir Vernadsky. So Ian, if we can get the first slide. Vernadsky's life, he lived about 80 years, and his life was perfectly split between the end of the 19th and the early 20th century, and he was a biogeochemist. He investigated the structure of the crust of the earth, its chemistry, its mineralogical distribution and structure, and how that was formed, and the causal effect of the action of life on the geochemistry of the planet. So the next slide. Vernadsky said in 1925 in a paper called Human Autotrophy, so think about that for a minute, human autotrophy. He said, "There exists now on the terrestrial surface a great geological force, perhaps cosmic. This force does not seem to be a new manifestation or a special form of energy, nor yet a pure and simple expression of known energy, but it exerts a profound and powerful influence on the course of energetic phenomena on the Earth's surface, and consequently has repercussions, smaller but undeniable, beyond the surface, on the existence of the planet itself. This force is human reason, the directed and controlled will of social man. So reason is a cosmic phenomenon. Now, I think perhaps the first example or embodiment of that truth about mankind in modern science comes to us from the work of Johannes Kepler, who is the first to demonstrate the coherence of human reason and the cosmos. Now, Kepler, you can pull the next slide up. Kepler lived in the late 16th, early 17th century, and he transformed the solar system from a bunch of dots of light across the celestial sphere, which we could observe and measure and predict the location of. He transformed the solar system from that to something physical, to a physical system which was moved by physical causality, physical principles. This was a revolution, and it was Kepler's hypothesis that the planets were moved by a physical cause or a physical power based in the body of the sun. Now, he further perfected that discovery of the physical orbits of the planets in his discoveries in what he called the harmony of the world. His discovery that the solar system was not just a collection of random bodies that happen to inhabit the same general region of space, but the solar system is a coherent system, something very much akin to the kind of coherence you get in a polyphonic musical composition, where many motions are brought together in concert to express a single idea. So, from the moment of the validation of Kepler's discoveries, that solar system became an object of reason, recreated, so to speak, recast as something which was coherent with and something which could be absorbed by the human mind. So from the early 17th century, the solar system in potential was an actionable part of man's domain. Now, mankind had to wait nearly 400 years before we could actualize that potential. And it wasn't until the early 20th century, with the developments of our mastery of chemistry, principles of chemistry, principles over materials science, and the development of powered flight, that space travel came to be something which was within our reach. And it was around that time that we saw the development across Germany, the United States, Russia, and perhaps other places of rocket clubs and rocket societies. Young men, primarily young men, experimenting with rockets and rocket flight. Krafft Ehricke was part of this. Hermann Oberth was part of this, who Brian mentioned in his introduction. The American Robert Goddard was part of this. And now, simultaneous with that seed crystal, with that first ability for man to realize this cosmic, himself as a cosmic force, coincident with that was the life and work of Vladimir Vernadsky. And I want to take just a moment to focus in on a couple of ideas of Vernadsky, who was an older contemporary of Krafft Ehricke, before coming back to Krafft Ehricke himself. So in 1926, and I just wanted to point out the timing of this, 1926 was just a couple of years before the famous film, the German film Frau im Mond, which means The Woman on the Moon, which was a film which was heavily influenced by Hermann Oberth, and which sparked the imagination of the greatest space pioneers, Krafft Ehricke included, and really you could say was the founding of the human space program. So around that same time, Vernadsky wrote and published a work for which he's well known called the Biosphere. Hit the next slide. So the first section of this great work, the Biosphere, is called the biosphere in the cosmic medium. And he begins it, the face of the earth, viewed from celestial space, presents a unique appearance, different from all other heavenly bodies. Now pause for a moment. The face of the earth, seen from celestial space, presents a unique appearance. When was the first time that we actually saw the face of the earth in celestial space? It would be more than 3 decades from that time. The surface, which separates the planet from the cosmic medium, is the biosphere. A new character is imparted to the planet by this powerful cosmic force. Now he's referring to the radiation, primarily solar radiation, which strikes the Earth. The radiations that pour upon the Earth cause the biosphere to take on properties unknown to lifeless planetary surfaces, and thus transform the face of the Earth. Activated by radiation, the matter of the biosphere collects and redistributes solar energy and converts it ultimately into free energy, capable of doing work on Earth. The outer layer of the Earth must therefore not be considered as a region of matter alone, but also a region of energy and a source of transformation of the planet. To a great extent, exogenous cosmic forces shape the face of the Earth, and as a result, the biosphere differs historically from other parts of the planet. The biosphere plays an extraordinary planetary role. Now, that's how he opens his work. The rest of the book is a very rigorous elaboration with examples, figures, and so forth of exactly what he stated there. So, already here in 1926, Vernadsky, in the tradition of Kepler, has abolished the separation between life and the cosmos. Now, around the same time, Vernadsky was also beginning to consider the unique action of human life on the planet. And what Vernadsky notes is that while life, living matter, transforms the face of the planet via its metabolism, via its ingestion of non-living and sometimes living matter, the transformation of that matter into new minerals, the depositing of these new minerals to shape the chemistry of the planet. While life performs this tremendous transformation of the planet due to its metabolism, its body, its biology, man's biology has not significantly changed for tens of thousands, if not more, years. And he makes what I find a very amusing point in a 1931 work called Scientific Thought as a Geological Force. He makes what's to me a very amusing point where he really makes a jab at the anthropologists, pointing out that the size of the cranium of the human skull is about the same size it was a few tens of thousands of years ago, right? So it ain't the size of your brain that matters, right? So man's biology hasn't changed yet. His impact on the planet has changed tremendously, profoundly, in an unprecedented way. Compare the amount of material, the amount quantitatively and then the quality of materials that we have mastery over. Compare where mankind is able to live, for how long he is able to live today to 100 years ago, 500, 1,000, 10,000. So when you look at man, he has transformed as a species so profoundly as the result of his reason that in the beginning of the 20th century, Vernadsky notes that the rate at which man is transforming the planet through his reason is beginning to overtake that of the biosphere, despite the fact that the biosphere has also been increasing its change on the planet over evolutionary time. So that process of man's reason being the predominant factor of development of the planet, Vernadsky called the noosphere, the sphere of human reason, human thought. And this led him to pose this question, which he writes in a short work in 1945, shortly before his death. He asks the question, how can thought change material processes? Here, a new riddle has arisen before us. Thought is not a form of energy. How then can it change material processes? So that's Vernadsky. Now he dies in 1945. But this way of thinking is also the basis, very much so, for Krafft Ehricke's own thinking and work. And Krafft Ehricke saw, is independently from Vernadsky as far as I know, Krafft Ehricke also saw that the development of life on Earth, the evolution of life on Earth, had been in an upward direction, in a direction of progress. And he notes that from the moment that life reached out from the surface of the Earth to the cosmic medium for its energy source by the development of the power of photosynthesis, life became a cosmic phenomenon. And that from the moment that this photosynthesis poisoned the atmosphere of Earth with oxygen, and then life developed technology to overcome that crisis, life laid the basis for the kinds of higher energy processes that made human intelligence possible. So Krafft Ehricke says in 1974, in his speech that Keisha referenced, The Heritage of Apollo, he said, now he's referring to this oxygen catastrophe and life's solution. Oxygen no longer was a waste product, but it stimulated the evolution of animals, the creation of a stable biosphere through expansion into all regimes of the terrestrial environment, the development of sensors and the brain, and finally, the emergence of the human life form. Now, what Krafft Ehricke saw, as did Vernadsky, is that man, as an element of reason, is not subject inherently to anything which ties him to Earth. That man is therefore naturally an element of the cosmos, and that what was happening at Krafft Ehricke's time, man reaching toward the cosmos with his aspirations for rocket flight, was not only something which was revolutionary, but it was also something which was necessary and completely natural. And he says, you can pull this up if you want, you don't have to turn the lights off, but you can pull up the next slide. Krafft says in the same speech from 1974, we are cosmic creatures by substance, by the energy on which we operate, and by the restless mind that ceaselessly metabolizes information from the infinitesimal to the infinite, and on the infrastructure of knowledge pursues its moral and social aspirations for a larger and better world against many odds. Through intelligences like ourselves, the universe, and we in it, move into the focus of self-recognition. Metal ore is turned into information processing computers, satellites, and deep space probes, and atoms are fused as in stars. I cannot imagine a more foreboding, apocalyptic vision of the future than a mankind endowed with cosmic powers, but condemned to solitary confinement on one small planet. So the question now is, for Krafft, is how do we realize this? How do we realize this extraterrestrial nature of man and human reason? So Krafft realized that man in space, space-faring man, etc., this doesn't occur by man, hopping on top of a rocket and flying out through the void of empty space. This is not a science fiction movie, right? Where man, goes through this complete desert and to finally arrive at an alien land. It's quite the opposite. Man does not move out into empty space. Man brings extraterrestrial space, beginning with the moon and cislunar space, which means the area between Earth and moon. Man brings that into the noosphere. Man brings that under the influence of human reason and transforms it. That's what man moving out into space requires. And Krafft also recognized that not only does man begin to transform extraterrestrial space by his action, but in turn, mankind himself is transformed by that in ways which can't necessarily be predicted or anticipated. So what I wanted to do is give a couple of examples from a paper that Krafft wrote and was still working on at the time of his death in 1984, which is called Lunar Industrialization and Settlement, the Birth of Polyglobal Civilization. And in that paper, Krafft puts forward this idea about the moon. He says, "It is a seventh continent, almost as large as the Americas. It is large enough to support a civilization. It alone offers the opportunity to create a strong exo-industrial economy based on a highly advanced nuclear, cybernetic, and material processing technology, ultimately turning large parts of the once barren lunar surface into a lush oasis of life, capable even of exporting foodstuffs to orbiting installations, if not to Earth." So in this paper, which I would recommend to everyone to read, Krafft has a section entitled Lunar Development Strategy. And what he says there is this. He says, lunar industry should be viewed as an organism that over time evolves to progressively more complex capabilities and generates sufficiently strong foundations for expansion. Lunar industry must be broad-based and diverse if it is to last. The need for economic feasibility and early returns will require a skillful interplay between market and customer-oriented products and services and infrastructural investments such as transportation, energy, surface and space installations that expand food production and diversify industrial productivity. Based on these considerations and on the Sellen economic principles mentioned earlier in the paper, and on basic evolutionary logic, the guiding principles of a lunar development strategy can be formulated, and then he enumerates 4, which are low-cost access to the lunar surface, ample and low-cost energy, early self-sufficiency, so self-sufficiency in terms of food, products, whatever is needed for people working at and on the moon, and industrial flexibility. So what he says about those 4, which he elaborates in the paper, he says, these principles are designed to ensure steady progress, early economic viability through ongoing productivity, and supply crisis resistance. The latter ensures that lunar personnel do not have to return to Earth because they cannot sustain their lunar existence without basic inputs from Earth. So I know that might have been a lot to take in, but hopefully you get the impression that he's thinking long term. He is thinking, how do you move man's noosphere and man's self-sufficiency and power of development off of the planet and onto the lunar surface? How do we begin to accomplish that? So to accomplish that, he lays out 5 stages of development. And he doesn't give a year by which each stage should be finished. He's not that specific, but he does give certain prerequisites of moving from one stage to the next. Now, the final stage is the establishment of Selenopolis, this beautiful moon city that Keisha showed. Actually, if you want to pull up, I have one or two more picture paintings done by Krafft Ehricke of Selenopolis. You imagine, Krafft Ehricke is a rocket scientist. You know, he invented the Centaur rocket that we still use today. He discovered how we could use liquid hydrogen fuel for the first. So this is Krafft Ehricke, and he's also an artist, inspiring people to imagine the appearance of lunar colonies. So this is an outside view of part of Selenopolis. Go to the next one. Yeah. Again, I think this might be the same one or similar to the one Keisha showed of inside. I think I have one more. Oh yeah, so here's the same one Keisha showed with the museum of astronauts on the left there and the rail and so forth, and people ice skating on the bottom. So Krafft describes Selenopolis thus. He calls it a city-state of lunar civilization. He describes it as a network of enclosures gradually expanding to cover many square miles of the surface and the subsurface. He says that it embodies urban, rural, agricultural, industrial, and resort areas. And he's very specific about the resort areas. He said there should be an Alan B. Shepard golf course, low gravity golf course, and a Krafft Ehricke swimming pool. But imagine that. So weather control, right? We can finally control the weather. We'll just do it on the moon. And then he says something very interesting about Selenopolis, the establishment of a true settlement on the moon. He says, Selenopolis and the selenosphere are a fully developed lunar world with a large population underwritten by industry. This stage of development is contingent upon a strong economic foundation, a very high degree of self-sufficiency, particularly in food production, and a powerful fusion energy base. Lunar civilization must not be in a receiver position vis-a-vis Earth. It must be economically self-determined to a large extent. This is really fun. Much will depend on lunar political status and the prospects by the end of the fourth development stage. Will this be a colony of Earth, part of the common heritage of terrestrial mankind? Or will it be an independent political entity, with Selenians in control of their own world? On the foundation of fusion power, the vast potential of the lunar economy renders the latter alternative possible and hence likely. Now, the establishment of this city-state of lunar civilization doesn't just come out of nowhere. You don't just slap up a multi-square mile lunar city. He lays out, as I said, 4 prior development stages which are necessary to the possibility of establishing Selenopolis. And I just want to give a couple quick examples of what those include. They include the development of the full utilization of lunar resources. And that means, and the reason being that the moon must be as self-sufficient as possible. And so that ranges from the first stage, which is simply the prospecting and discovery of what minerals are available, and this moving from there to the establishment of automated mining facilities, which can be attended to by people living in lunar orbit. It involves early production centers for oxygen, which are necessary both for life, the breathing and life support systems of the astronauts, and also for propulsion, for fuel, transportation. And then the final stage, or the most advanced stage of development of lunar resources, is the establishment of a central processing facility, which he gives a name to. He calls it Cynthia. And Cynthia will be a processing center for raw materials. He names aluminum, silicon, iron, glass. It will produce intermediate materials such as silicon chips, solar panels, powdered metals, and it will eventually produce finished products such as machinery, habitats, and so on. Cynthia will be supported by feeder stations, remote feeder stations, which can mine the product wherever it's located on the moon and ship the raw materials directly into Cynthia, either via electric motor car, cargo car, or electric rail, or he had this idea, which I think is really fun, of taking advantage of the low gravity environment of the moon, and also the fact that the moon has almost no atmosphere. And you could basically catapult cargo deliveries on a ballistic trajectory to receiver craters. But again, it was very scientific, actually calculating the energy requirements for one versus the other. So that's resources. Another necessity, which Keisha mentioned, is nuclear power. You have to secure abundant power on the moon. And he and many others concluded it must be nuclear and ideally fusion power. One primary reason is that the nighttime on the moon lasts for 2 weeks, so you ain't gonna depend on solar panels. But also the high energy requirements for fuel processing, for the creation of oxygen and hydrogen fuels, requires a lot of power. Materials processing requires a lot of power. And he says something which is totally fascinating to me, which is that for a number of reasons which he lays out, it might actually be easier for us to achieve commercial fusion on the moon than on Earth. The final example I'll bring up of what he took into account is transportation. We're not just going to have a developed moon and then a developed Earth, right? You actually fill the space, so to speak, in between with complete transportation infrastructure. So the beginning stage of that is to use the existing rocket technology we have and existing vehicle technology we have to create a fleet of ships which can get a lot of the components out into lunar orbit to begin assembling them. And he calls for the early establishment of a circumlunar space station, which will serve, and the beautiful thing is that since he wrote that paper, we've had a lot of experience with the International Space Station. So the circumlunar space station will be a laboratory, a habitat for scientists and engineers, a place of leisure, and a workspace. And it will be attended by what he calls a moon ferry, a vehicle where you can easily access the lunar surface. He also calls for the development a little bit later of a geolunar freighter, or a lot of geolunar freighters which can make regular trips of cargo, raw materials, and products between Earth orbit and lunar orbit. And he calls for many fueling stations to be positioned between the Earth and the moon in cislunar space, such that you wouldn't have to bring all of your fuel with you off of the Earth, but you could lift off, refuel at a fueling station, and continue the trip. Yeah, gas station. And I mean, this is something which is being discussed in NASA, and I'm sure a lot of other space agencies as well. Now, the final thing I want to mention, which I also find very fun, is he really took into account the most efficient use of energy and fuels. And one thing that actually takes a lot of fuel is landing on the lunar surface, powered descent. By powered descent, think about what Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong had to do with their the LIM. They had to actually have rockets which would allow them to power down to the lunar surface. So Krafft Ehricke came up with the idea that you could, again, take advantage of the unique lunar environment to make what he called a slide landing. So the idea is that the moon has a unique terrain and it has a low gravity environment. So instead of powered descent, the vehicle would land on a long and flat runway and slide to a stop. And he said this: touchdown at velocities of up to 5,500 kilometers an hour, bring the lunar slide lander to a halt along an 80-kilometer long landing strip through the interaction with the glassy and sandy material. And and this introduces a new branch of spaceflight dynamics, for which I propose the term perenodynamics, from the Latin word perenosis, sandy, which is sand, right? And he said with that you could actually reduce your fuel use by 90%. It's, yeah, it is a lot. But he said it takes 2 minutes. So, so I wanted to go through all of those examples, not because we are proposing that this is exactly the program that we have to implement. I didn't go through those because that's exactly what we should do or what we necessarily will do, although I suspect actually some of it we probably will. But the reason I wanted to go through some of those examples is because those proposals of Krafft Ehricke represent a way of thinking about man's future which is a total commitment to limitless growth. It's based on a completely rigorous and scientific understanding of the principles of negentropic growth that you saw in those examples of Vladimir Vernadsky. And it represents a way of thinking which is based on the understanding of the nature of the human mind that we saw with Johannes Kepler. And that is what we have to be committed to with our space program. Specifics aside, that commitment is primary. And we can't settle for anything less, any other, little piece that might let us send one probe out somewhere, right? We actually have to be committed to the limitless progress of man and everything that entails. So just to conclude, I'd just ask everyone to reflect for a moment on Krafft Ehricke and the great optimism for mankind that he projected and that he was committed to. And you think about the time in which he lived, from World War I through World War II under the Nazis, through a very uncertain future in the United States, to having to fight against the environmentalist attacks on the space program. He had a complete optimism in mankind. And he saw man not as a thing which fills space, but he saw man as a necessary and beautiful part of the development of the universe. And so as we, here in the United States, move hopefully to join this new paradigm, we should remember that, Krafft Ehricke was born German, but he was also an American. This is our heritage. And this is something that we have the responsibility to offer the rest of the world as we move forward into collaboration with China, Russia, and all other nations on this commitment to man's progress. So, leave it there.
Open it up for questions here. I just would like to add a couple of notes. First, today at 8 o'clock in the morning Eastern Time, the Long March 7 launched the first of the new family of rockets of the People's Republic of China. These are medium lift up to heavy lift as this family develops, and it's going to allow them to carry supplies and so forth up to their new space station, the enlarged space station, which will launch around 2020, 2022. So just to note that was today, this morning. And further, related to that, last week, last Friday, the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, such a thing actually exists, and China agreed to collaborate in developing, incorporating developing nations in cooperation on China's upcoming space station program itself. The agreement was announced by the UN Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space at their annual session in Vienna, and then the statement was released last Friday. Wu Ping, the deputy of China's Manned Space Agency, said the following: space exploration is the common dream and wish of mankind. We believe that the implementation of the agreement will definitely promote international cooperation on space exploration and create opportunities for United Nations member states, particularly developing countries, to take part in and benefit from the utilization of China's space station. So I just think that was appropriate. So questions for our speakers? Disagreement? Otherwise, yes.
This is an easy question. Megan, are the original paintings of Krafft Ehricke in the Johnson Space Center?
I don't think so. I think
They
his
need to
family.
be.
They should be. I believe his family still has
Oh,
possession of them.
they're not on display somewhere.
The, just to mention it, the Marcia Freeman's book, our colleague Marcia Freeman's book, Krafft Ehricke's Extraterrestrial Imperative, is available just Amazon, Barnes & Noble online. If you Google Krafft Ehricke books, the first one will pop as Apogee Books, and they're selling it for $10. Otherwise, it's $25. So, and that has some of the paintings and drawings there. Just to mention that. Yes. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, well, Keisha, I was struck by the quote you used last night from Anna Arendt
Yes.
in her attack on science. It's easy for people to see evil like Hitler, but someone who was supposed to be a victim of the Nazis, but was also a collaborator, a writer, is probably more evil than Hitler, if you would just elaborate some more on what Ron said about the space program.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wish. Let me see if I brought that with me.
Sure, Keisha's getting her notes here.
Did you bring that with me? Yeah, it's. 1 second.
I should take the podium here.
Okay.
They're tired of looking at me.
Anyway, so while she's looking for that, I did we had a webcast yesterday where myself and some colleagues from the LaRouche Policy Committee we were talking about the direction of the nation under this war drive and the belief in this zero growth system. And what I found really telling about this zero growth system is how evil it really is. And so in 1963, this Hannah Arendt, who was married to Martin Heidegger, I think they were actually married, or they were at least.
Believe in marriage.
They were at least, oh yeah, maybe she didn't believe in marriage, or they were collaborators, or whatever you want to call it, partners or something. She wrote a journal. She wrote in the New Atlas Journal, "The Conquest of Space and the Stature of Man," and in that she actually starts to talk about this idea that mankind is only confined to what he can understand through the senses. That it's only the senses that govern mankind's understanding. It's not the human mind. It's not the mind's ability to create anything new. And very specifically, she starts to talk about how the idea that here, she says, the magnitude of the space enterprise seems to me beyond dispute, and all objections raised against it on purely utilitarian levels. That it's too expensive, and that the money were better spent on other things. And I'm paraphrasing here. But then she goes on to say that at any event, man insofar as he is a scientist does not care about his own stature in the universe or about his position on the evolutionary ladder of animal life. And she goes on to basically make the point that as I said it earlier, that human beings would not create anything good. Could not be possible for human beings to create anything that would be good. And it starts to liken the idea that human beings are only out for their own personal survival. And I'm trying to find, she says that the simple fact that physicists split the atom without any hesitation the very moment they knew how to do it, although they realized full well the enormous destructive potentialities of this operation, demonstrates that the scientist does not even care about the survival of the human race or on Earth, or for that matter, about the survival of the planet itself. This idea of, splitting the atom, what this actually meant to the scientific transformation of what you would be able to bring about was, it was only going to be used for ill and for evil, and that it's about mankind doing harm to the Mother Earth, and not that human beings were actually, as Megan went through, transforming the noosphere, transforming Earth, and bringing into existence something better. So it's very manipulative in its domain, but it really gets across this idea of that there is the fight, is the question of the nature of mankind. What is the true nature of mankind? And it's called The Conquest of Space and the Stature of Man, which, if you want to spend your time reading, go ahead, but otherwise you can be more doing more things optimistically by reading Krafft Ehricke.
Yes, sir.
Keisha, when you were speaking earlier, you had a diagram or whatever, a chart with two sections in it. One section was to meet governmental, aeronautical companies, business, and so on and so forth. The other section was people.
Yeah.
How are you going to continue? How are you going to make the people do the work? However, it's a money deal. It's not wanting to go to the moon. A guy's going to develop with money because he's getting paid. Going to the moon is governmental. It's aeronautical companies that are getting grants and so on and so forth. How do we keep that up? How do we keep the interest up in the government? Like Kennedy wanted to put a rocket on the moon. That's what spurred the space program.
Mm-hmm.
It takes the government to do that. It takes that entity to start the public into joining
Absolutely. And you're right, it takes visionary leadership, and it takes more than just money. It takes the idea that we have to actually invest in the scientific progress in the future of our nation. And you think about it, what were the actual spin-offs and examples technologically,
Right.
scientifically, economically that came from that? And many people, we always talk about the fact that the rate of returns for going to the moon economically was greater than anything that had existed. You were getting $2 back on the dollar, or some amount that was an increase in the economic potential. And what happened at that time that we just, as Megan was saying, that we just kind of like blanketly send a rocket, to the moon, this heavy payload, this Saturn V rocket. I always use this example, people, after this, you should go, it's not far from here, right up the street, and go and see the Saturn V rocket in the warehouse over at the Johnson Space Center. You can actually go to the rocket park and see it for free. Just walk right in. I mean, this massive, beautiful example of mankind's unlimited potential, that every field of our scientific capabilities had to be put to work. You know, computer scientists, engineers, aeronautical engineers, rocket scientists, you know, people in welding, you know, and, you know, had to weld the parts for this, had to put the parts together, had to make sure that it didn't come apart and that it was going to be safe for human beings to travel in. And that transformed our entire economy. That's just an example, along with the many other fields that had to play a role in bringing this process into being. So now you talked about the money, so-called aspect of it. The problem is that that's been the dominant flaw and the corruption that has dominated our current system of government. You know, how much money are we giving to bail out Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, you know, Wells Fargo and so forth, who still today continue to promote the same policy that led to the banking collapse of 2007, 2008, that is not producing any economic growth whatsoever. These bailouts don't have any rate of return that is actually giving back to the productivity of society. But we could be investing in our space program and putting people to work. And not just putting them to work, because this is not just, you know, makeshift work here, but we're talking about transforming the standards of living in the population, as we did under President John F. Kennedy. And that's the role right now, is that the key is we have to reject this monetarist system, and we have to actually bring about a system of, as I stated earlier, economic value, which is organized around the idea of advancements in human progress is the basis of real economic value. You invest in your future, in the future of your children. And I mean, a great example of that is the investment that is being made in the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the billions of dollars and so forth, and in credit, in investment that's being put into all the great projects that are happening around the world. And you're right, the U.S. government has a moral obligation and mission to participate in that development. The question is, you know, the U.S. government is not some outside entity that's sitting up there ruling like we live in we're not subjects. We live in a republic, and we have to demand action, that the U.S. government actually acts for and on the interest of its citizens and the population, and bring about this ability for this capability for progress and for economic development. And we have an obstacle to that, and people know that. A very evil obstacle in its intent, and that is the fact that we've had, under the conditions of the U.S. government, under the current President Obama, and under the last 15 years, is that the people of the United States have allowed our government to be turned into to be turned toward fascism, and to promote the progress of mankind. And we have to turn that around, and we have to demand a turnaround to that, and not be afraid, and to realize that it is only going to be through the people emerging and taking responsibility once again that we can bring that about.
We have $1 trillion to spend upgrading our nuclear weapons. Imagine how many
yeah.
cities
Yeah.
Point well taken.
Yes.
Yes. Mike? Wait a
Yeah,
minute.
when Keisha was reading the quotes from Hannah Arendt in her ending on the note scientists didn't hesitate to split the atom, and what that led to. It reminded me, I can't remember whether it was the Air Force Academy commencement speech or Obama's statements in response to the Orlando killings massacre. But he, as part of his main point, he said that war and conflict and violence of man against man has always been part of humanity.
Hiroshima, his remarks at Hiroshima.
Yeah. And that's exactly the same sentiment or perversion of human history that Hannah Arendt represented. And it's ironic because here's the Nobel Prize winner who was given it after virtually 3 months after he assumed office, but every Tuesday he presides over deciding which alleged terrorist is going to be killed, and many of them are civilian casualties.
The drone program.
Right, the drone program, right? And who is threatening, whether he intends to or not, but he probably doesn't care, nuclear war by his actions in regard to Russia and China. And here he is basically announcing to the world that there's nothing better in mankind than violence against each other. And then that also reminded me of his statement, I don't know, several years back when someone brought up fusion energy and he said, oh, we don't need that fancy and expensive form of fusion. We need nuclear power. So I think putting those two statements forward is in this current world situation, and then his rejection of the win-win policy of China and the Silk Road. And anybody who can deny that this man represents a threat to humanity and is a perversion of everything that this country has ever stood for needs to look at those statements and then reevaluate their opinion. I just wanted to bring that up as something for people to consider. And if you want to comment on it, you certainly can.
He's been at war more than any other president we ever had.
Well, I would just say if we look at the presidential candidates, we realize that's not the solution. So it really comes back to the American people and what we do to prompt our fellow Americans to engage once again, overcome their fears, and move our nation, into an open world. It's there, and if we can create, and that's the purpose of these meetings around the country, New York, San Francisco, here in Houston, is to prompt that kind of engagement by a growing number of Americans. It's overcoming this fear of the majority. By that I mean the fear of public opinion, which is manufactured. Let's not kid ourselves. But it doesn't take a majority. That's a silly argument. It takes people standing up and standing for the truth, speaking the truth, and reaching out to those immediately around them. Reaching out to the people around ourselves, to organize them, to prompt them as well, and create in this process an engagement, a process of deliberation across the body politic. And I think, not to make too much of it, but the eruption in Europe around the Brexit and so forth, everyone knows it. People are angry, they're frustrated, they're fearful. But what they need is, these ideas, and to see a way in which they can make them a reality. And thank God we have what we have going now on the other side of the earth. We have collaborators, we have friends, and we can build a better world. Maybe one of you wants to come through.
The only thing that I want to add to that is that the basis of what we're about to do next here in our musical presentations is what is required to transform the culture and the mindset that's needed right now to build this better world, because people have been living under a condition of fear and have gone along with the identity that human beings cannot create that which is beautiful. And what we'll find is a complete rejection to that idea in the power and the beauty of classical music and culture, and that culture which is necessary to foster today and to bring about at this very moment where the existence of mankind is being threatened, because that's the culture that nations who are representing this new paradigm understand is the only thing that is going to allow for this new conception of man to emerge. And it's something that has been, the embodiment of mankind going back to the Renaissance, as said. This idea of artistic, scientific, and creative discoveries. And it's a commitment and a understanding of that which is truthful. Because we're not singing up here because it's nice and beautiful music. It is beautiful music, but more so because of what it represents for the transformation of mankind. And I mean, this is something that our organization with the Schiller Institute, the idea of Friedrich Schiller embodying the profound and ennoblement of mankind, how do you actually do that? You give them a sense of beauty, and we've lost that in our society right now. So as we think about the music and that you're going to hear here today, and then think about the stuff that you hear on the radio and stuff that some of you listen to every day, then you might want to change your idea about why it is that this music represents a uniqueness to the expression of who we really are. So, and the fight to free mankind from enslavement. As you will hear from some of the American Negro spirituals, African American spirituals, and also from some of the classical pieces and some of the patriotic pieces as well. So I'll leave it at that. Another question? Joel has a question.
Yeah, Megan and Erica's old paper, did he call for using helium-3 as advanced fusion?
Yes, he did. Yes, he concludes we have to move to fusion as fast as, as feasible, recognizing in 1984 we hadn't yet developed fusion. And he recommended moving as soon as we could to helium-3, to using the fuel for the fusion reaction of helium-3 and deuterium, which is a kind of hydrogen. And at the time, Krafft didn't really seem, from what I've read in the paper, he didn't seem to know that the moon was an abundant source of helium-3 itself, that there was abundant helium-3 in the lunar soil. So he recommended manufacturing it from tritium, which is another fusion fuel, which we would have to import from the Earth to the moon. But I think he would probably be delighted to know that the moon itself is already a fuel depot for helium-3. So yeah, and that's what's beautiful about him, is he was not practical at all. He went right for what's the requirement. The requirement is, and what's the requirement and what is achievable in a certain foreseeable future, not something which is so far in the future that it's not thinkable, right? So he was very far-reaching in that sense, yeah. And so he called for helium-3 and had a whole plan for how much you could manufacture based on the leftover process heat from this process. But yeah, I think he'd probably be happy to know that we can get it right from the soil.
Yeah, just because you were talking about self-sufficiency on the moon, and think about the agricultural aspect. And we live in the part of the United States east of the 20-inch rainfall line, and almost anything will grow. And you would think that someplace like Illinois, Iowa, someplace like that, Ohio, would be the most productive agriculture in the country, but it's actually not. And it's counterintuitive, because the most productive agriculture is in the desert. And it's because by man controlling the water input and the isolation of the agricultural area from weeds, but since it's a desert, there's no weed seeds, things like that to contend think about that, extend that situation to the moon, on the moon you would have to have synthetic soil and synthetic atmosphere, plus you'd also have to have synthetic light, because you're probably not going to have a plant that's going to be able to survive without light, right? It's probably not going to work out too well. So anyway, so you could conceivably get possibly the most productive agriculture ever in a place that you would never think it would be a good agricultural place.
Yep.
Maybe, it has to be experimental.
Yep, great.
Well, let's have a short break now. That's agreeable. Short break, 10, 15 minutes. Coffee's available, cookies,
We're gonna set up.
water, and so forth. And we'll be getting our chorus together and our musicians together. And we'll start again in 10, 15 minutes.
There is a bomb in you and to make the wounded whole. There is a bomb in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. Sometimes I feel discouraged and think my words in vain, but then the Holy Spirit revives my soul again. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. If you can preach like Peter, if you can pray like Paul, go home and tell your neighbor he died to save us all. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. To heal the sin-sick
Yes, we'll rally round the flag, boys, we'll rally once again.
shouting the battle cry of freedom,
We will rally from the hillside, we'll gather from the plain.
shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor, up with the star. While we rally round the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
We are springing to the call of our brothers gone before.
Shouting the battle cry of freedom,
And we'll fill the vacant ranks with 1,000,000 free men more.
shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor, up with the star. While we rally round the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
We will welcome to our numbers the loyal still true and brave,
shouting the battle cry of freedom.
and although they may be poor, not a man shall be a slave,
Shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars, while we rally round the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
So we're springing to the call from the east and from the west,
Shouting the battle cry of freedom, and we'll hurl the rebel crew from the land we love the best. Shouting the battle cry of freedom, the Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars, while we rally round the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
oh great day, the righteous marching, great day, God's gonna build a Zion's wall. Great day, the righteous marching, great day, God's gonna build a Zion's wall.
Chariots move down the mountain top.
God's gonna build a Zion's wall.
My Lord spoke and the chariot stopped.
God's gonna build a Zion's wall. Oh, great day, the righteous marching, great day, God's gonna build a Zion's wall. This is the year of Jubilee,
God's gonna build a Zion's wall.
when my Lord set his people free.
God's gonna build a Zion's wall.
Oh, great day, the righteous marching, great day, God's gonna build a Zion's wall.
When I was a mourner just like you,
God's gonna build a Zion's wall.
I prayed and I prayed till I got through.
God's gonna build a Zion's wall. Oh, great day, the righteous marching, great day, God's gonna build a Zion's wall. We want no cowards in our